God.
So, and
yeah, you saw that before it actually happened. That's incredible.
And I told everybody before it happened that I had this bad dream about Mr. Bender, because they already knew about the other thing, because that got out really fast about, the voodoo thing. And then he found out about that, and it just escalated from there. But I tell you what, I learned after that to keep my mouth shut. So if I ever had any more weird dreams, and some of them come true, and they still do, but you know what? I keep it in my head and just keep my mouth shut.
Yeah, that's why I write mine down, because I can't hold it in, because they're just so vivid and detailed that I can't hold it in, or I feel like I'll go mad. Sometimes they're just really brutal, and I can't take it. I'm surprised they haven't drove me insane.
Well, you're in Western State mental. No, I'm saying, but I mean, how often, Karen, do you get these dreams?
I'd say probably every couple months, maybe every three, maybe about 3 months, 3 or 4 months. They're not every night. They're not all the time. They just suddenly I'll have one, and I've learned to know the difference between those kind of dreams and just regular sleeping dreams. So when I have one of those, I know I'm going to wake up and I'm going to write it down, and then I can go back to sleep. Maybe.
Yeah. Have you seen any political dreams or anything like that, like where our country's going or anything? And don't mention people.
I did have a dream about 911 years, at least probably about 2 years before it happened. Only at the time, I didn't know what it was about. But I dreamt this huge plane went over the top of our house and crashed in the woods behind us. And there were thousands and thousands of voices screaming, and then all of a sudden it was just silent, and then absolute silence. No explosion noises, no sirens, nothing. It was just dead silence. And I woke up and I was terrified, because it was just so real. And I never told anybody about that one. And then 9/11 happened, and I had just gotten home from work and was watching it happen on TV, and I instantly knew. That dream popped back into my head, and I was like, oh my God. And I think it was the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania was the one I dreamt about.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
They crashed in the woods.
I sure wouldn't want to have those type of dreams. And by the way, if you get any about me, do not tell me, please.
Okay.
I have enough stuff going in my plate. I don't need to know if I'm going to die tomorrow.
Okay.
Well, moving right along, have you had any other weird I know that you've been interested in ghost hunting and all this stuff. What all have you done in the past?
When I was about 16, I had my first experience with an entity. My brother had come home talking about something he saw on his way home, where they were building a new house. And so we had like a group of friends that we hung out with. We all piled into his van, and we went to that house. And excuse me. And he had seen red eyes in the windows, like shooting across the upper floor windows and shooting across the lower floor windows. And no cars had gone by while he was when he saw it. He backed up thinking it was his taillight, and he stepped on his brakes. He couldn't see his taillights in the windows. So anyway, we all piled in the van, and we went to this house. And we're kids, we're teenagers. We're like, oh, this is cool. We're walking around inside this new house, and it wasn't finished yet. And so some of us were upstairs, some of us were downstairs. I'm looking out this back window. I guess it was the kitchen window, but there was no glass in it yet. And out back, it used to be a farm field to a family that owned the property. And across from the new house was the old family's cemetery. And there was like maybe 20 headstones in there from the 1700s. and the whole area used to be their farmland for their livestock and horses and stuff. And out back, if you go further back in the woods, there's a big swamp back there. So you know there's nothing back there. And I looked out the window, and I saw this black thing. It was just like this blacker than black. Like it was nighttime, and this thing was so dark, it was darker than the darkness outside. And it was moving towards the house. And at the same moment, my brother came running up the stairs from the basement, saying that we had to get out of the house. It was going to be full of bees. There were bees flying around in the basement. And so everybody started running out of the house. And I remember I was like the last one out, and I ran out the front door, and I stopped, and I turned to my left, and I waited. I saw the thing come around the corner, and there was like those, like those low hedge bushes people plant in front of their house and stuff, the pine ones.
Uh-huh.
It was up above the bush. It was coming over the top of the bush, and it looked like swirling smoke, just like all swirling in on itself. It wasn't getting bigger or smaller. It was just moving within itself. And all of a sudden, I just froze, and I could hear this voice in my head. And it was like communicating with me through my mind rather than verbally. And it said, if I accepted it to come to me, to make contact with me, I would know everything I ever wanted to know. I would know answers to every question I ever had in my life. And I would know everything it knew. And that's when the warning bell went off in my head, and I was like, no. And I'm talking to this thing with my, inside my head. I'm not speaking out loud to it. My friend came back, because I didn't run off with them. He came back, and he tugged on my arm, trying to get me to come with him. And he started running back up the driveway. And this thing was still, like, trying to get me to accept it, to I guess, let it come into me, to be a part of me. And I wouldn't let it. He came back, and he grabbed my arm again. This time he pulled me really hard, and I snapped out of whatever it was I was in. And I turned to run. And running up the driveway, there was a pile of broken concrete, and I tripped and fell over it and almost cut my thumb off. I took a chunk out of my leg. And but ever since then, and I mean, I'm 50 now, it seems like yesterday. It's just ever since then I've wanted to go back. And I know the house has been sold a few times since it was built, but the cemetery's still there. The original farmhouse is still there.
Well, how far was the cemetery, Karen, from the house?
It was right across the street. Right across the street.
I have this thing about cemeteries. I have talked to investigators that said, "Oh, look, that a cemetery is just a place for the remains. They have already, went to where they were going to go. They went to the next level. They went through the light or in the darkness, depending on which one you want to go for. And it's nothing there." But it's like car bodies, basically. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's true or not, because I think there's times when maybe they're so evil, and maybe they don't want to go to the light or to the darkness because they know which place they're going to end up eventually. So they choose not to walk into that light or to that dark tunnel. And I got a funny feeling
to stay in the middle.
Yeah, they stay where they feel comfortable with, or where their body is. So I kind of feeling cemeteries I feel, can be places that are haunted. But it sounds like what you had, that entity wanted to get into you, but it needed your okay to say, "Come on in," and it put you in a trance.
Like inviting a vampire into your house. They can't come into your house, supposedly, unless you invite them.
I don't know if I buy that. That's moving the scripts.
I'm using that as an example. I mean, I have no idea if there are vampires or not. I know there's mental vampires that can suck the joy out of you, but I felt like that I had to give my okay to let this thing take over me or be a part of me.
It would have possessed you. That's what would have happened.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't be the nice person you are today. Who knows what maybe you would have done. And I do think that's a lot of people that commit murders, go out and rob stores and that. I think some of these people, are not schizophrenics like some of them, the doctors say they are. I think they've been possessed.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So I'm not saying everybody, was possessed, or is possessed that goes out and commits a crime. But I do think there's a certain percentage of people that are possessed and they have no control what's going on because part of their brain doesn't realize what's going on.
Exactly. But yeah, I felt like if I had said, okay, give me all the answers I want, that this thing would have, I would have been in deep, deep trouble. But I felt like this thing was older than the farm itself. I felt like it was something that had never been human and was just evil.
Don't forget, in a lot of the old farmhouses, old houses in general, out in the rural areas, okay? And I'm going back before 1900. So let's say around from 1895 back. A lot of times when people died, if they had a farm, they just buried them, out by the oak tree, out past, the front door or out back, in a nice area or up the hill on some acreage on their property. So you don't know. I mean, that property, it could be possessed. And you don't know that. You move in and guess what?
You've got company.
Yeah, it's called evil.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It's just, some of the people I've had on the show, like I had the guy who was a detective with the state police, and he was on my show, and he was talking about this one place that he went to, quarters would drop out from the ceiling.
I remember you. I remember you talking about that. That was... I'd get a bucket and be rich.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering. I don't know how the quarters were materializing. So somebody that maybe lived in that house, maybe for years and years, hoarded quarters. I have no idea, but it's just some of these strange things that can go on. So I mean, you've been lucky. Now, have you ever going to trying to ghost hunting, going to the cemetery at night, or going to somebody's house and try to find out if there's actually ghosts there or if it's the people's imaginations?
We've actually done investigations in our home, which we believe the property is haunted, not actually the house itself. We've also been to Fort Niagara, where we've done sessions with the SB7 at what's called the Commandant's House, where we've spoken with an admiral, and there's a couple women that come through. There's a child. They talk about how a guy named Howard climbed an apple tree, and he died because he fell from the apple tree and broke his neck. We've had experiences where there was a party across from the house at the officers' club, and 3 voices came through the SB7 talking about how they had cake and ice cream, and the little girl wanted some, and the male voice told her to go lick it. I'm like, oh my God, this little girl's going to go and lick everybody's food, and they're not going to know it.
Interesting. So now I want to get into this relic. There's some pond or lake that you go to, or it seems quite often, and you keep pulling up all this military media type. I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead.
I go to Lake Ontario a lot, and over the years, walking the shoreline, I'd find buttons here and there, and I decided to look them up, and I found out that they were from World War I. And then we found a friend of mine and I, we found the spot where they were coming from. Besides being washed around in the lake, there's actually a spot that they come from, where they had been bulldozed